I have to admit that I broke something and it was probably my fault. Come on. We're in Quebec to review the newest short travel bikes, and I'm not gonna lie, the gorgeous green and sparkly BMC Fourstroke LT is one of the best looking bikes in our fleet. Now, LT means that this is the longer travel version of BMC's four-stroke platform, with it having 120 millimeters on both ends versus the 100 millimeter on the even racier models. To do that, it uses a very tidy looking dual link suspension layout, and if you do have a finish line sprint in your future, or maybe just a cable fetish, there's also a handlebar mounted remote that locks out both ends of the bike. BMC is always up to something interesting, aren't they? Well, this bike also has a frame integrated dropper post that gives you 80 millimeters of drop in a package that the Swiss brand says is lighter than your standard dropper post. And there's a lot to talk about here, so let's find out how this new BMC performed on the trail.
There you have it for the details. Let's talk about climbing. The first thing you notice is that this thing, there's no room for adjustment on the stem. How does that feel out on the trail?
Yeah, so just like the other BMC that we had a while back for the value bike field test, and that was a relatively inexpensive hardtail, BMCs show up with the stem slammed.
Yeah.
So this bike had a fairly low front end, and as soon as I got on this thing, it felt like I was just like in go mode. It puts you in that sort of like, I'm gonna pedal hard, I'm gonna stare at my front wheel, I'm probably gonna try to get some PRs but blow up, you know? What did you think, Matt?
Yeah, I was surprised with that because this is supposed to be the LT version, which has 20 mils more travel front and rear than the pure XC race bike. But the stem comes slammed, there's no adjustment there. The dropper post only has 80 mils of travel. So it kind of puts in perspective who this bike is really for.
Yeah, it makes it real clear that this bike is for going fast up the hills and through the cross-country course.
And what about like other than the stem? Like how does the position feel other than, you know, just being low and fast? Does it feel?
I mean, it feels sporty. Yeah, I mean, that about sums it up. Honestly, when we were on that BMC, we're out here wearing our baggies, and I felt like I should have brought my white Lycra and my Breathe Right strips when I was on that
Everybody's really
thing.
glad that you didn't.
They've had enough.
So let's talk about suspension now. Matt, how did it feel out on the trail?
Well, I jumped on this bike after Levy had it, so I kind of ran with what pressures he had, and it was quite firm. Both uphill and downhill, I ended up having to lower the pressure substantially just to get some grip. Now, that means you have a lot of platform to stand on and really get the power down, but the grip wasn't quite as equal as with like the XE or the Allied.
How did the bike feel on kind of like there's more tricky where you might be losing traction a bit? Did you feel that it was efficient and had enough traction?
Yeah, so it's kind of a middle ground between the Lapierre, which was, I think, overly firm, and the Allied, which was, I think, surprisingly forgiving. This was somewhere in the middle. It has a remote lockout, and if you're racing, you're probably gonna wanna use it. But it felt like a good pedaling bike that offered a good mix for a cross-country race bike with 120 miles of travel of traction and pedaling efficiency.
Did it feel like that on the climb, or did you want a little bit less or more? You know, like a lot of cross-country bikes have 100 millimeters. Did it feel like too much on the climbs?
It didn't feel like it had 120 mils of travel, to be honest. It did have quite a firm platform to push against, and that very forward position did make it easy to hit like really tight switchbacks and keep the front wheel on the ground. The chainstays are also quite short, but it did feel very centered despite those short chainstays.
Yeah, you know, I want to expand on that a little bit. That low front end, when you get into, like when you're really pedaling hard and the trail is tight and you're trying to get to the top of something quickly, having a low front end makes a night and day difference. And that bike, this BMC in those kind of settings, yeah, it felt quicker than the others for sure.
This is the Fourstroke LT with 120 millimeters, means that it should be a better descender than the World Cup version. How did it feel when you pointed it downhill?
It kind of worked, but like I said, you were in a very poised position, like kind of vulnerable, but like once you engaged and accepted that was your position, the bike actually rode fairly well. It felt like there was still quite a bit of front axle ahead of me.
Yeah.
And I think that was because my center of gravity was so low. Yeah. So like once I kind of got into the comfortable position and realized where I should be on the bike, it kind of came alive. This has a little tiny handlebar, no rise, level brakes. So like this is not a descending focused bike, but it kind of surprised me. I did have to let the pressure of the shock down quite a bit. And once I did that, it started to open up a little bit easier on some of those smaller, rougher hits.
Yeah, I would agree with Matt. Like when I was first riding this bike around, I was like, oh boy, this is...
You like scary bikes on the downhills though, don't you?
I mean, the scary's not the word I would use. Entertaining is the word I would use.
Entertaining, right.
But when I got this thing on some of the descents that we rode, like we didn't ride anything super gnarly. We rode stuff that's appropriate for these bikes. And yeah, Matt, I was surprised at how comfortable I felt. Like the handlebars are quite low. That freaking integrated dropper post that we're gonna talk about in a few minutes only has 80 millimeters of drop. But again, I kept having fun on it, you know?
Yeah, I think it's one of those bikes you have to be engaged on.
Yeah.
Like it's not a relaxing bike, but if you have those sharp skills and you're paying attention on that day, then it can go fast.
Yeah, and I also want to make sure that we're talking about this bike relative to other cross-country-ish bikes with 120 mils travel. Like, no matter how surprised Matt and I were about descending on this bike, it's not a trail bike. No, this is a capable cross-country bike. And I mean, it fits that bill pretty good. I like the way the suspension worked and the handling was great once I got used to it. So next up, we're gonna do time testing, and I didn't do any of it. Sarah did it all, so I'm gonna throw it to her.
Yeah, so the BMC was actually the slowest bike on the downhills.
It didn't feel that way.
No?
But yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's because you know, like when you get in a sketchy car, it feels like you're going really fast.
Yeah,
Maybe
exactly.
That's why.
Yeah, and then the clock is like, actually, you're going a lot slower than you think you are. But it did tie for the fastest time on the climb. So yeah, win some, lose some. Overall, it was one of the slower bikes because of that downhill time. So the Fourstroke 01 that we had, pretty expensive bike, $9,000. Are there some other options for people out there?
There's only two Fourstroke LTs to choose from BMC. Ours is the $9,000 top end model, of course. The other model comes with a GX drivetrain, mechanical drivetrain. It goes for $7,000 and it's got a bit heavier wheels on it. I mean, $2,000 is a lot of money, but it's gonna come down to whatever you have. I love the Axis drivetrain, so I'm kind of a fan of this bike.
Let's talk about the components now. Matt, what do you get for $9,000?
Well, this bike does have a lot of integration. You've got the sort of one-piece looking bar and stem, that's super clean. It does have the level brakes, so that kind of tells you what this bike is all about, not descending focused. The other thing I thought was really cool was the really sharp and strong DT Swiss wheels. Those definitely got put through the ringer on all the rocks around here in Mount St. Anne, Quebec. So yeah, for an XC race bike, this thing held up very well.
And what
Except,
I have to admit that I broke something and it was probably my fault. So this uses a BMC rad seat post with it's like race application dropper, I think.
Yeah, I think you're right. Good.
It is really cool. It's an oval shaped integrated seat post with the bushings actually pressed right into the carbon fiber frame. And it's controlled from the bottom. You adjust the seat height with an M5 bolt at the very bottom of the seat tube. The dropper gives you 80 millimeters, which, I mean, there's an argument to be made that that's enough for cross-country bikes, but I also feel like if you're gonna make this cool integrated dropper seat post, why not just give us more travel so I don't flip over the handlebars?
Well, and it's also for all sizes, from small to extra large, that you get 80 millimeters of drop, which I thought was kind of surprising.
Yeah, exactly. But unfortunately, you know, the story goes downhill from here because I actually broke the bolt that holds the seat post in place. Like when you adjust the seat height, it's at the bottom of the seat tube. I was tightening it, I thought very gently with the short end of my Allen key multi-tool. And yeah, the head bolt snapped right off. And it is a proprietary weird bolt with like an O-ring seal on it and all this stuff. And then all of a sudden our seat post was stuck down. So I admit that bolt broke because I probably over tightened it. My old torque wrench elbow is clearly out of adjustment. But on the other hand, if you're a consumer and you're on a trip and you break that thing, you're freaking screwed. You can't just put another seat post in there.
No.
Like, Yeah, sure, BMC would rush us apart if I asked them to, but they're not gonna rush Billy Bob apart in Timbuktu or whatever, you know? So I don't like the fact that it's 80 mils of drop on all the sizes. I don't like the fact that there's only 90 millimeters of seat post height adjustment. I don't like the fact that it's proprietary, but I do like the fact that it's integrated, proprietary, and really neat. And I know none of that makes sense, but like the dork in me loves it. But you know, from a consumer point of view, I think this is trouble. I broke it.
Let's talk about the pros of the four-stroke. Matt, what are some of those?
Well, this bike definitely looks sharp with all that integration, and it rides like a sharp bike. You definitely have to be on it, but this is a 120 mil front and rear XC race marathon bike. If you wanted to go the other way and trim it down to 100 mils, you could very easily do that with just an air shaft and a shock stroke reducer.
Let's get into some of the cons. Levy, sounds like the dropper post is one. What else?
Yeah, so the integration thing is definitely a con in my mind. If it worked though, it would be a pro. But we had some issues, so there you go. The big con that I think I should mention is that for having 120 millimeters of travel, this thing still feels like pretty freaking cross country, you know? And I think a lot of people could take that as a pro if that's what you're looking for. But if you just got off the Allied, which has the same amount of travel, and you get on the BMC, you're gonna think this thing has like 50 millimeters of travel or something. Like it's a rougher bike. It's meant to feel sportier, and it definitely does. And for some people that's a pro, for me that's a con.
So a lot of cool integration, but who is actually gonna go out and buy the four-stroke 01?
Well, the Swiss Army knife, as we call it, has a lot jam-packed into it, which makes it really clean, but it's kind of cluttered when you have to like work on it, maybe adjust a couple things. So there's that aspect to it. It's definitely for somebody who's technically inclined and definitely race focused, because this is not a forgiving bike, but it does have some downhill life to it if you really push it and you're on the ball.
There you have it. That's the BMC four-stroke long travel 01. Stay tuned for more videos from the Quebec field test.